You want to hear about the most insulting thing another judge ever said to me? Let me tell you about Judge Harold Blackwood, who called me small time during a judicial conference. 3 months later, he was sitting in a very small federal prison cell, learning that corruption has a way of making big egos very, very small. This story started when the Rhode Island Judicial Ethics Board received complaints about Judge Blackwood's courtroom. Not just one or two complaints, dozens of lawyers, defendants, and victims all saying the same thing. Justice was for sale in Blackwood's courtroom if you knew the right price. I first heard about the investigation when Chief Judge Patricia Martinez called me to her office. "Frank," she said, "we need someone with an impeccable reputation to review these allegations against Judge Blackwood. The complaints are disturbing." What Chief Judge Martinez showed me made my blood boil. Judge Harold Blackwood had been systematically selling verdicts in his superior court for over 5 years. Drug dealers walking free after paying $50,000 to Blackwood's, quote, consulting company. Domestic abusers getting probation instead of prison time after their lawyers made donations to Blackwood's wife's charity. "Frank," Chief Judge Martinez continued, "we have documented evidence of at least 37 cases where Blackwood dismissed serious charges or reduced sentences immediately after receiving payments through shell companies." The scope of corruption was staggering. Blackwood had turned his courtroom into a marketplace where justice went to the highest bidder. A millionaire's son who'd beaten his girlfriend into a coma, probation. A wealthy businessman who'd killed a family while driving drunk, reduced to reckless driving. A connected politician who'd sexually assaulted his secretary, case dismissed on procedural grounds. "Judge Martinez," I said, "this isn't just corruption. This is a systematic betrayal of every principle we swore to uphold." The Judicial Ethics Board appointed me as special investigator with full authority to review Blackwood's cases and examine his financial records. What I discovered was a criminal enterprise operating under the cover of judicial robes. Blackwood had been taking bribes through an elaborate network of shell companies, fake charities, and real estate deals. His wife's Children's Education Foundation was actually a money laundering operation that had received over $3 million from lawyers representing defendants who had received favorable rulings. The bank records told the whole story. Within days of major payments to Blackwood's network, serious felony charges would mysteriously disappear or get reduced to misdemeanors. Murder charges became manslaughter. Armed robbery became theft. Sexual assault became disturbing the peace. But the evidence went deeper than financial corruption. Blackwood had been coordinating with corrupt prosecutors to ensure that certain cases received minimal preparation. Key evidence would be ruled inadmissible, and witnesses would be intimidated. Detective Robert Chen told me something that made my stomach turn. "Judge Caprio," he said, "I've worked 30 years in law enforcement, and I've never seen anything like Blackwood's operation. He wasn't just taking bribes. He was running a criminal organization. The most sickening discovery was how Blackwood's corruption had specifically targeted cases involving violence against women and children. Every domestic violence case that ended up in Blackwood's court resulted in either probation or dismissed charges. But Judge Blackwood made his biggest mistake when he decided to confront me directly about my investigation. But Judge Blackwood made his biggest mistake when he decided to confront me directly about my investigation. The Rhode Island Bar Association was holding its annual Judicial Conference at the Newport Harbor Hotel. I was presenting my preliminary findings to the Ethics Board when Judge Blackwood approached me at the cocktail reception. Clearly, having had several drinks and thinking his Superior Court position gave him immunity from accountability. "Judge Caprio," he said, holding a martini and wearing an expensive Italian suit that probably cost more than most court clerks make in 3 months. "I hear you've been asking a lot of questions about my court proceedings." "Judge Blackwood," I replied, "I'm conducting an official investigation into allegations of judicial misconduct. Would you like to discuss any of the concerns that have been raised about your courtroom?" "Concerns?" He actually laughed, loud enough that other judges turned to look at us. "Frank, you run a municipal traffic court in Providence. You handle parking tickets and minor violations. I preside over Superior Court cases involving millions of dollars, major criminal matters, in the real power structure of this state. Judge Blackwood, justice doesn't have different standards based on the size of the courtroom or the amounts of money involved." "Listen, Frank," he said, his voice dripping with condescension as he stepped closer. "I appreciate that you take your little municipal court seriously, but some of us operate in the real judicial system, where complex cases require nuanced decision-making that goes far beyond simple traffic violations." Nuanced decision-making. This corrupt judge was calling systematic bribery nuanced decision-making. "Judge Blackwood, are you saying that accepting payments in exchange for favorable rulings is nuanced decision-making?" "I don't accept payments," he said, getting more agitated. "I receive consulting fees for legal expertise, speaking honorariums for educational presentations, and charitable donations that help fund important community programs. These are legitimate business arrangements that municipal judges wouldn't understand." "Judge Blackwood, these business arrangements happen to coincide with favorable verdicts for the people making the payments." "Frank, correlation isn't causation. That's basic legal analysis that someone with Superior Court experience would understand. Municipal judges deal with simple matters that don't require the sophisticated legal reasoning that Superior Court justice demands." That's when he said the words that would seal his fate and end his career. "Frank, let me be clear about something. You're small time. You handle parking violations and petty disputes that any law student could manage. I handle real cases with real money, real consequences, and real power players. You wouldn't understand the pressures and complexities of Superior Court justice because you've never operated at that level. You're small time. A corrupt judge who sold verdicts to the highest bidder was calling me small time because I refuse to understand that justice could be purchased for the right price." "Judge Blackwood," I said, "the only thing small here is your understanding of judicial ethics and the oath we took to serve justice rather than our bank accounts. Frank, you're investigating matters you're not qualified to understand. Municipal judges like you should stick to traffic violations and leave real justice to real judges who understand how the system actually works." "Judge Blackwood, real judges don't take bribes, regardless of what you call them." "I told you, I don't take bribes," he replied, his voice rising with anger and alcohol. "I receive consulting fees, speaking honorariums, and charitable donations that help fund important community programs. These are sophisticated financial arrangements that extend far beyond your municipal court experience. For favorable verdicts that coincidentally benefit the people making these payments. For services that extend beyond the courtroom and contribute to the broader legal community," he said, waving his martini glass for emphasis. "Frank, you're operating in a league you don't understand. Your municipal court deals with small cases and small people. My court handles major matters that affect the real power structure of this state. Is that why you charged $50,000 to dismiss murder charges? Blackwood's face went white, and his hand holding the martini started shaking. Frank, you're making very serious accusations against a Superior Court judge. I'd be very careful about spreading rumors and speculation that could severely damage your own modest judicial career. Judge Blackwood, they're not rumors or speculation. They're documented financial transactions that correspond directly to your court rulings with mathematical precision. You have no authority over me, Frank, he said, pointing his finger at my chest. You're a municipal judge investigating a Superior Court judge. The hierarchy of this judicial system puts me far above your level, and you're about to learn what happens when small-time judges try to take down their superiors. But what Judge Blackwood didn't know was that I've been wearing a recording device provided by the FBI. Every word of his arrogant confession was being captured for federal prosecutors building a RICO case against his criminal organization. Agent Michael Santos had been investigating Blackwood's corruption for 8 months, using the judicial ethics investigation as cover for a much larger federal operation. When Blackwood essentially confessed to selling verdicts while calling me small time, he provided the final evidence agents needed. Judge Caprio, Agent Santos told me the next morning, Blackwood just gave us everything we needed. His confession to taking bribes, his admission that Superior Court justice operates differently than municipal court, and his threat to damage your career for investigating him. Agent Santos, how extensive is this criminal organization? Judge, Blackwood's network includes 12 lawyers, 4 court clerks, 2 prosecutors, and at least 6 defendants who've admitted to paying bribes for favorable treatment. We're talking about over $5 million in illegal payments over 6 years. The scope of the corruption was even worse than I'd suspected. Blackwood had essentially turned the Superior Court into a criminal enterprise where wealthy defendants could purchase acquittals, reduce sentences, or complete dismissal of charges. But the most sickening discovery was how Blackwood's corruption had affected real victims. Families of murder victims who'd watched their loved ones' killers walk free after paying bribes. Sexual assault survivors who'd seen their attackers get probation instead of prison. Domestic violence victims who'd been told that justice wasn't available at any price they could afford. 2 weeks after the judicial conference, FBI agents arrested Judge Harold Blackwood at his home during a dawn raid. The man who'd called me small time was led away in handcuffs while federal agents seized computers, financial records, and evidence of his criminal enterprise. The federal indictment read like an organized crime prosecution rather than a judicial misconduct case. Racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and bribery, 47 felony counts that painted a picture of systematic corruption that had infected the entire Superior Court system. During the trial, prosecutors played the recording of Blackwood calling me small time, while essentially confessing to selling verdicts. The jury heard his own words about nuanced decision-making and services that extend beyond the courtroom. But the most damaging testimony came from the victims whose cases Blackwood had corrupted for money, and their stories broke the hearts of everyone in that federal courtroom. Maria Santos took the stand first, a domestic violence survivor whose abuser had walked free after his family paid Blackwood $100,000 to dismiss attempted murder charges. Judge Blackwood told me during sentencing that sometimes the justice system has to consider broader community interest she testified through tears. He said my abuser was a pillar of the business community who made one mistake and didn't deserve to have his life ruined. Mrs. Santos, the federal prosecutor asked, what happened after Judge Blackwood dismissed the charges? My abuser came to my house that same night and beat me so severely I was hospitalized for 3 weeks. He told me that judges could be bought and I'd never get justice no matter how many times I called police. Detective James Murphy testified about how a convicted child molester had received probation instead of the mandatory 15-year prison sentence after his lawyer made a $50,000 donation to Blackwood's wife's charity. Judge Blackwood said during sentencing that the defendant had learned his lesson and didn't need incarceration to become a productive member of society, Murphy explained to a horrified jury. Detective, what happened to the children involved in this case? The defendant molested 6 more children over the next 2 years before we finally got him convicted in federal court. Judge Blackwood's corruption directly enabled those additional crimes. Prosecutor Lisa Chen testified about how Blackwood had threatened her career, which he tried to object to obviously corrupt rulings. Judge Blackwood told me that prosecutors who didn't understand judicial discretion might find themselves reassigned to parking violations, she told the federal jury. He said municipal judges like Frank Caprio handled small cases because they couldn't understand complex Superior Court justice. But the most devastating testimony came from Jennifer Williams, whose teenage daughter had been killed by a drunk driver who received only probation after his wealthy family paid Blackwood's network $200,000. Judge Blackwood told me during the sentencing that my daughter's death was a tragedy, but destroying another young man's future wouldn't bring her back, Jennifer testified. He said the defendant came from a good family who'd made substantial contributions to the community and deserved a second chance. Mrs. Williams, how did Judge Blackwood's ruling affect you? My daughter was 17 years old with a full scholarship to Brown University. She wanted to become a pediatric nurse to help sick children. The drunk driver who killed her was racing through a school zone at 90 miles per hour with a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit. And Judge Blackwood gave him probation? 6 months probation and a $1,000 fine. The defendant's father had paid Judge Blackwood $200,000 through shell companies 3 days before sentencing. The pattern was clear throughout dozens of victim testimonies. Blackwood had been systematically protecting violent criminals, drunk drivers, child molesters, and domestic abusers as long as they could afford his prices, while their victims received no justice whatsoever. After only 6 hours of deliberation, the federal jury found Judge Harold Blackwood guilty on all 47 counts. The man who thought his Superior Court position made him untouchable was facing life in federal prison. At sentencing, I was asked to provide a victim impact statement on behalf of the judicial system itself. Your Honor, I told the federal judge, Judge Blackwood didn't just steal money or sell verdicts. He stole something much more valuable: public trust in the judicial system. When judges sell justice to the highest bidder, they damage every courthouse, every courtroom, and every judicial oath in America. Judge Blackwood called me small time because I refuse to understand that Superior Court justice operates differently than municipal justice. But justice doesn't have different standards based on the size of the courtroom. A bribe is a bribe, whether it's for dismissing a parking ticket or dismissing a murder charge. The federal judge sentenced Harold Blackwood to 35 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Judge Blackwood, he said, You corrupted the sacred trust placed in judicial officers and betrayed every principle of American justice. But Judge Blackwood's arrogance continued even in defeat. As federal marshals prepared to take him to prison, he turned to me one final time. "Frank," he said, "you may have won this battle, but you're still just a municipal judge handling small cases. I was a Superior Court judge who handled real justice." "Judge Blackwood," I replied, "the only thing superior about you was your criminal organization. Now you have plenty of time to think about justice from a very small prison cell." The federal marshal led him away to begin his sentence in a 6-by-8-foot cell at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, about as far from superior as a former judge can get. The aftermath of Blackwood's conviction transformed judicial oversight throughout Rhode Island and sent shockwaves through court systems across New England. The state implemented comprehensive reforms requiring financial disclosure for all judges, electronic monitoring of case dispositions, and independent review of unusual sentencing patterns. But perhaps the most important change was cultural. Judges throughout the state realized that no position, no matter how, quote, superior, provides immunity from accountability when corruption is exposed. The families of Blackwood's victims finally received justice through federal civil rights lawsuits that awarded millions in damages. Maria Santos, whose daughter's killer had bought his freedom, used her settlement to establish a foundation advocating for victims' rights in corruption cases. "Judge Caprio," she told me during the foundation's launch, "when Judge Blackwood called you small time, he revealed that he thought justice comes in different sizes based on wealth and position. You proved that real justice is the same size for everyone. Huge enough to protect victims and small enough to fit in a prison cell." The 12 lawyers who participated in Blackwood's bribery scheme all lost their licenses and faced federal prosecution. The 4 court clerks who'd facilitated the corruption received prison sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. The 2 prosecutors who'd taken bribes to throw cases were permanently barred from practicing law. But the real victory was restoring public trust in the judicial system. Citizens learned that corruption would be exposed and punished, regardless of the perpetrator's position in the judicial hierarchy. 3 years after Blackwood's conviction, I received a letter from federal prison. Judge Blackwood had written to apologize for calling me small time and to request my assistance in appealing his conviction. I wrote back with a simple response. Justice doesn't recognize superior or municipal courts, only honest judges and corrupt ones. You chose corruption and got exactly the size prison cell you earned. Judge Harold Blackwood died in federal prison after serving 12 years of his 35-year sentence. Prison officials told me he'd spent his final years claiming he'd been misunderstood and that his consultation fees were legitimate business arrangements. The man who'd called a municipal traffic court judge small time learned that federal prison cells don't care about your former position, your superior attitude, or your criminal wealth. Justice made him very, very small. My father always told me, "Frank, the size of your courtroom doesn't determine the size of your integrity." Big judges who think they're above the law often end up in very small spaces. Judge Blackwood learned that lesson the hard way, 35 years too late. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, there's nothing small about honest justice, and nothing big about corrupt judges except their criminal sentences. Thanks for listening, and God bless.